Johnny Mac's in the house for a little football at 4. And Doug Pederson speaking to the media today. We'll have an update on all of that and more right now with John McMullen from 97.3 ESPN.com. He's at J.F. McMullen on Twitter. Johnny Mac, what's going on, my man?
How are you guys?
All is well on this side of the counter, if you will. And, obviously we're at the middle of the week here, so we're starting to kind of fade away on the Redskins and move ahead to the Falcons here. And, Doug Pederson at the press conference today, it seemed like a lot of questions regarding Malik Jackson here. What did we learn about what they're going to do moving forward in that spot?
Well, Malik is most likely out for the season, as we all know, placed on injured reserve. You don't really have to designate people for return any longer, so the NFL shifted that rule. But for all intents and purposes, he's done for the year. So everybody gets elevated. Tim Jernigan is the starter. Hassan Ridgeway is in that third role that Tim was in. And I signed a veteran player in Akeem Spence to fill in that fourth defensive tackle role, and that kind of indicates where this team is. We always talk about, if they were a bad team, if they were the Miami Dolphins, you probably just elevate Bruce Hector, but this team feels the championship window is open, so they went out and they got a guy who started, I think, 55 games in this league. So at the bare minimum, he understands how to play, and that's what the Eagles are trying to do. They're trying to make sure they have at least competent people up and down this roster.
Now, the anticipation, here's a guy who started 16 games last year, but his role is not going to be the same here. Doug did say he's going to be kind of the fourth guy.
Yeah, and that's certainly the start at least, and that's understandable. I mean, we'll see if he's active. Doug said there's a possibility. Just got out of the locker room. I talked to Akeem. He said he's optimistic. He's been working out. He's been working for that phone call in case it came. It did come. So we'll see if he's ready to play this weekend. But certainly early, he's going to be the fourth man in the rotation. So not a ton of playing time. So you would think that would be helpful as far as early. He's not going to be asked to play significant snaps. The other part is you got to, and Doug talked about this today as well, still got to be cautious with Tim Jernigan coming off the herniated disc surgery. So the hope is he's healthy, he's completely back, but the Eagles will keep a close eye on him, and you probably can't overwork him maybe as much as you would like to if you're Jim Schwartz in that defense.
Yeah, real quick, because Spence is coming from Miami, I guess the thought would be he wasn't good enough to make the Dolphins, or was he too good to play for the Dolphins?
Yeah, I mean, the Dolphins are a different direction. That's why, again, if they had Malik Jackson, for instance, and that injury occurs, you just play a young guy because they're trying to rebuild. Some people will say they're trying to tank and go in an opposite direction. So by no means is it a black mark on the resume that Akeem Spence was not wanted back by the Dolphins, because he is what he is. He's a veteran role player. He's okay. He's not great. I don't want to overstate it. And that's not what they're looking for. The last thing they want is to win an extra game because Akeem Spence or somebody of that nature is too competent. So they're going about things in a different way.
So let me ask you about the pass rush now, because this was supposed to be a different kind of look. It was supposed to be Fletcher Cox and Malik Jackson in the middle, and then Brandon Graham on the edges with Derek Barnett. They did a few different things against Washington, but now without Malik, does Vinny Curry become the third defensive end who sees the most time in the pass rush package with Graham moved inside next to Cox?
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. I think that's one of the most interesting parts of this injury because, we're going to have to see what Jim wants to do. I think ultimately it could be that, although I think Vinny is not really comfortable on the left side. I think the most logical way to go is to kick Brandon Graham inside, but then you need a left end. Typically, that in the past, that would be Chris Long coming in. He would be very comfortable. You can say just slate Vinny into that role, but I think he's more comfortable as a right end. Whereas on the other hand, somebody like Deshaun Hall dominated in the preseason from the left side. Maybe he gets an opportunity, but we know what preseason football is. I don't think you should get fooled by that. What I don't think they're going to do is just stick with Tim Jernigan or Hassan Ridgeway or Akeem Spence at some point and go that two defensive tackle route. I think maybe Vinny kicks inside the defensive tackle and they keep Brandon on the left end. I think that would be the more likely scenario if he wants to use Vinny, because Vinny has some versatility and can play inside.
You know, it's amazing. It's probably not being talked about a lot, and it just really popped into my head. But we talking about the Malik Jackson injury, but the injury to Joe Osman, and I don't know if he was going to be a good player or not. Nobody really does, but we know the Eagles really liked him, and he was a versatile guy that they moved around a lot. The injury to him really comes back and haunts them a little bit because he probably would have seen more time if he had been productive.
Oh, there's no question. They were developing a package for him as a joker player, and that's a stand-up inside rusher.
Right.
They had a package in place. He was going to make this football team, and he was going to play. Now, I don't know how much they were going to use it each week, but people forget about that injury, and that's the role they were preparing him for, was an inside pass rusher. And a lot of teams do that now, have an undersized guy rushing from the inside to create mismatch. It's sort of the opposite of what offenses is doing. Everybody's looking for situational matchups and situational football. And that's one the Eagles were going to roll out that they really haven't played before because of the unique skill set of that particular player. They really don't have anybody else with a similar trait and skill set standpoint. So, we're not going to see it. And we'll see next year how quickly Joe can come off the ACL and if he can get back to that same explosion. But there's no question this team loved him. He was going to make this team, and they were going to use him.
It almost seems like now, right? You know, you go back 2 years ago, they had some depth issues at running back. Jay Ajayi got here. Last year, wide receiver, Golden Tate got here. You wonder if Howie is thinking a few months down the road at the deadline if there's a versatile DN. Now, we know he didn't go after Clowney as much as the other team did, but you wonder if that's now his radar for this year.
Well, everything's on his radar.
Oh,
he checked in on Clowney, he checked in on Melvin Gordon. He'll roll. I mean, they might be awful offers that nobody's going to take seriously, and I think in both of those instances it was a case of we'll take the player if you don't want him, in essence. So the Eagles are always involved, and I mean, we know Howie, and probably even more so, he's itching this year because he didn't make a splash really at the cut down day. He made some lower level trades earlier in August, but Howie's got that gambler sort of part of him, and he likes to do things that make splashes, and he hasn't been able to do that. But you have to be very cognizant of who's available at the trade deadline. And because this team has assets not only now in the form of draft picks, but also certain players. We've already talked about the extra skill position players and the fact that everybody's not touching the football. Well, maybe somebody goes, and Nelson Aguilar would be the most obvious name on that list. So he's got a number of different avenues he could go.
That's interesting. I was going to ask about something different, but you just walked something right into my path, which was, I don't want to say the Eagles have too many weapons that they have to, but because they have so many guys, and, Arthego Whiteside's a guy that didn't get a lot of snaps, who I'm sure they would love to figure out a way to get on the field. Goddard's a guy they would probably like to get more, is there a part that says, look, we don't even, I don't want to say we need, but yes, Aguilar's a guy that we could move at the deadline or try to think about moving just based on the fact that we got a lot going on here. Is that a guy that would probably be at the top of that list?
Well, yeah, I think he's at the top of that list from a player standpoint because obviously you're not going to trade the younger players and the guys who are more entrenched as part of the offense. Obviously, you're not going to move. And the final part is this is the final year of his deal. He's got a high number, and we've constantly talked about, second contracts. And from Nelson's standpoint, I think there's going to be some frustration at some point because how do you make money in this league? You make money by producing. And he's looking for that second deal, whether it's here or somewhere else, and he's just not going to get the touches to produce. So all of that kind of, you throw it into this big pot of stew. But from the Eagles standpoint right now, as we stay here today, and you just saw it with Malik Jackson, I mean, this is a team that I think rightfully considers itself a legitimate Super Bowl contender. One of the reasons why is because they can overcome attrition. Most teams can't overcome a lot of attrition, and Malik's a perfect example. That's a very good player. The Eagles had really high hopes for him next to Fletcher Cox. They only get one game before he's essentially done for the season, but they do have Tim Jernigan, and there are health concerns. But if he's the guy he was before the injuries took over, that's pretty good as a backup player. And you could argue those first 6 games of the 2017 season, he was a better player than Malik Jackson. You can make that argument.
Mm-hmm.
So,
and Doug told you today, John, you asked him the question about the health standpoint, and he did admit we've got to be cautious. So one thing that Moshe and I were kicking back and forth, last week Jernigan played 25, Ridgeway played 24, and Jackson played 36. What is your anticipation on how those are divvied up now?
Well, it's got to be an uptick for both guys. And I remember Malik left late in that game, so he would have been a little bit higher if he didn't get injured. So let's say he would have been at 40 to 42. That's probably the number you're looking at. And you just mentioned, 25 and 24. Mm-hmm. So there probably is a concern. You don't want to give all 42, say, to Tim Jernigan, so you probably split it up between the two of them. And maybe if you can get Akeem Spence a handful of snaps, maybe that helps as well.
Well, but Vinny probably also, right? Because Malik does running and pass rushing.
Vinny inside,
right?
Yeah, you can do it from the pass. But Vinny and Brandon, whether it's one or the other, most likely, mm-hmm. They're only going to take reps inside in nickel situations, in pass rushing situations. You're not going to see them in base set. I don't think at all. Mm-hmm. So there's a number of different ways they can go, and it's pretty good. All those names you mentioned, Brandon Graham, Vinny Curry, Tim Jernigan specifically, even Spence, and the Eagles like Ridgeway a lot. He's more of a younger, unproven player, but they traded for him. That's pretty good depth. So they can handle this better than most teams.
You mentioned Nelson Aguilar and not having a bunch of catches in the opener. Deshaun kind of alluded to the fact that he pulled him aside and said, hey, don't worry, next week it could be you. And you're right, the whole on a one-year deal, essentially, and being a free agent, you want to be productive. Do you feel like this is a storyline that we might have to monitor throughout the year? Because Nelson can be a little bit temperamental when he's not getting the ball, and I'm not going to try to say he causes lots of problems, but he clearly needs to have a good year to go into free agency here. So do you think that this is kind of something that is worth watching on how he reacts week to week to his targets?
Yeah, I don't think it's just Nelson. I think it's Deshaun as well. I mean, Deshaun has a history. Week one, he got the football, so right. Everything is glorious. But there are going to be times this year when he maybe has 2 touches. And so I think that's going to be something for everybody to keep an eye on, even Alshon Jeffrey. Mm-hmm. I wouldn't say Zach Ertz because he's going to get his touches. Dallas Goedert, I think, is too young of a player. I think that's one of the positive parts of JJ. I mean, JJ barely played, right. But he's not going to complain because he's a rookie player. So I think that helps a little bit. But, yeah, this has been a theme since the spring. When we saw this team on paper, there's only one football. some guys aren't going to get it each and every week. And, yeah, I think at some point it's going to be an issue.
One guy who did get it a lot was Darren Sproles, 16 touches, and you've talked about.
How do you feel about that, J-Mac?
Too much Sproles.
Yes, well, and look, whether Sproles is the best guy or not, he is 36, and I do have a problem. You can't lean on him the whole season. I mean, you can't say, look, we're going to roll with a 36-year-old running back. Look, Adrian Peterson was one of the best at all time, and Washington's not saying we're going to hitch our wagon to Adrian Peterson. So to give a 36-year-old guy 16 touches, that to me, that stood out. When I read that in print, I was like, whoa, he got 16 touches, and I kind of pontificated about this yesterday.
Part of that, yeah. I mean, and I think a lot of people misinterpreted what I said. Darren was very effective in those touches, so number one.
Over 5 yards a tote.
Yeah. So that part isn't an issue. But you bring up, and Doug acknowledged, he can't touch the football 16 times for 16 weeks. He's not going to last. And you see the last 2 seasons, and injuries tend to pile up at this stage of people's career, and the more he touches it. So you got to be more cautious with it, and he admitted that. So it then becomes Miles and Jordan and Corey. And I said my point with the running back by committee is I think there should be more defined roles. That's it. And because I said every team in this league runs a committee approach except Carolina. So it's not like the committee is the problem. It's how the committee is run. It's Doug Pederson's committee. Right. And nobody can get a feel for their role each and every week. Hey, because they won a Super Bowl, people say it works. Come on. I mean, on one avenue, people say, well, the Eagles won the Super Bowl because of Nick Foles. That's not true either. He was a big part of it. Corey and Jay Ajayi on that particular night in Minneapolis were a big part of it. But as I explained, and I'll ask you guys this question, if you were going to put a list of the top reasons why the Eagles won the Super Bowl, where was that running back by committee? Where would that be on that list? Not at the top. I guarantee you that.
Right. You would probably have pass rush first.
Well, if you figure that, remember that whole year, people were waiting for Ajayi to kind of take over that job.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, Carson in the passing game was really what won them games. Yeah.
Yeah. So it would be way down the list. So I think, and I always taught the science of logic, people default to one thing. It's not they won because of the running back by committee, because that was in the game. They won despite the running back by committee. That's the other option, and that's the more likely option.
Let me run this past you, John. I was thinking about last night, and maybe I'm overthinking it because we try to rationalize things, but the one thing about Washington's front, very good defensive front. They play at 3-4. They got big, stout defensive linemen, and they're not guys who run sideline to sideline. They're more brawn to me, and they're more physical, I would say, than fast. So I wonder if Doug was really just looking for more speed to the edges and more speed going with Sproles. And then this weekend, when you're facing a defense that's quick and fast but not as big in Atlanta, they're known for being undersized but fast. If that's when Doug comes and hits him with the Jordan Howard early on.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think it's game plan related. Mm-hmm. I don't think there's any question about that. And one of the parts of the Redskins game nobody talks about, the game completely changed when Allen got hurt.
Yeah.
And he left the game, but and that's a really good player. But you're right. I mean, Atlanta plays on the fast track down there. Deion Jones is back. They're really undersized, really fast. So yeah, it would make more sense to use the bigger back and try to smack him. But look, I think there's a fine line. Carson Wentz always used that term. I'll use it. There's a fine line between getting too cute, and I think the Eagles are on that line when it comes to this committee approach. With all their weapons in the passing game, all they need is Jordan Howard to run the ball 20 times, and it's going to be effective. And he's a volume guy, and he's not going to get hurt. You can't ever say that in the NFL, but he's proven. My point is he's proven to be durable. He's proven he can handle those types of touches. No other running back on this team has proven that. Very few running backs in the NFL have proven that. And the second part of that, guys, is he's a one-and-done guy. So what does Jerry Jones do with running backs? And you can kill Jerry Jones, but one thing he does very smartly with running backs, what do you do with DeMarco Murray?
He runs him into the ground.
Same thing as the Steelers. Yep.
Yep.
Right.
And the Eagles aren't going to want Jordan Howard back. Hey, it's the ugly part of this game, but run him into the ground. That's all you need. And I can't believe they're not doing it.
Well, maybe they're saving him for the back end of this. About this last night, because some people wondering if he's going to play. Why would he play? But he practiced today, which would indicate he's probably going to play on Sunday.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people don't understand the difference between a civil complaint, a criminal complaint. Anybody can accuse you of something. It's civil. It's not a judgment on who's right, who's wrong. This would be an extremely, extremely dangerous precedent for the NFL to go down this road and to put somebody on the exempt list over a civil case. They've never done it before. Now, this league, from a personal conduct standpoint, they can do whatever they want. So they can do it, but, man, that would be a dumb decision. So, and they've made some dumb decisions. My theory from day one, from minute one, we're on day one, has been they're not that dumb to open that Pandora's box. That's my assumption. I'm going to stick by it, but they've proven to make some dumb decisions in the past. But boy, would that be a horrific precedent to set.
John McMullen at JF McMullen, hashtag football at 4. We do it every day at this time, and he was kind enough to do it on the Boardwalk Honda hotline. All right, John, talk to you tomorrow.
All right, thanks, guys.
And John McMullen, like all guests again, appeared via the Boardwalk Honda hotline.